Hi. Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick fix here. I have my microphone on, yet, and it's gonna be on how to copy underwear. So this isn't gonna be edited. I haven't even brushed my hair today, so just forgive me. I'm just gonna do this really quick. So here is a pair of underwear, and someone said that they're doing some without a side seam, so you're gonna have to choose where your side seam is since you're sewing them together. So my side seam is right here. You can see that. So you can use scissors or a rotary knife. I'm going to use a knife today. I'm going to cut this right on the seam line. So let me show you what I mean by that. So see here, I cut that right on the seam line. Okay, and we'll do this one too. Now if you don't want to destroy your pair, it'll be a little fiddlier to do, but you can do that. It's just that it might not be as accurate as well. So now what we're going for is symmetry. So now this one has a separate gusset here, so I'm going to cut that off as well. And I'm trying to get right in the crack of that seam there. So now we have that piece. And then we'll cut this one off. Right in that ditch of the seam. It's okay if you're not perfect, but just try your best. Oh, there it is right there. Okay. So now I'm going to cut the elastic off, and I think for this purpose, let's see if I cut it right here along the seam line, that's still going to have elastic in it because it's sewn, you know, in the seam allowance here. So if you want it to be a little easier to deal with, you can cut the whole piece of elastic out, and it just depends on what yours is, if it's, you know, fold over or something like that. So you're going to have to make your own call there. I'm going to cut it off so that it's easier to deal with, and then we're going to save one piece so that we can note how much width that we lose when we do this, but we'll get a nice flat piece. All right, so now we'll keep this, right? We can toss this. And we'll do the same for our waist and our legs here. You know, and I'm like basically cutting off a almost precise 1/4 inch there, right? Now, if you're starting to get a piece that you're like, which one's the side seams and which one's the gusset seam, you need to probably mark it right now. So we can put a little notch right here. This is the gusset, so I know. You can mark right on this. If you've cut your underwear up, all bets are off now, right? So this is the gusset right here. Leg, I can't write on there, but you get the idea. I'm going really fast here because I don't want you to get too waylaid by these details. All right, so here's our waist. Now you can save some of this elastic as a measurement potential for when you're sewing and cutting your elastic, but honestly, your elastic is probably really different than theirs, and you might have to experiment with that a little bit more. All right, so here's our front, and then we just have our back. This one has a really a very forward side seam. You can tell like how wide the back is and how narrow the front is. Last one. Now, if your knit could play nice with being ironed, you might find it beneficial to iron your pieces, but in all honesty, I find that ironing curls some knits even worse. But you could starch them and then let the starch dry, and then maybe lay them out nice and flat, maybe even pin them nice and flat and let them dry. They may be a little easier to deal with. There's a few little things you can do. All right, so now my next thing I'm going to do is fold these pieces in half. We're going to try and be as symmetrical as possible, right? We're going for something, we're not going to trace the whole open piece. That's not accurate enough. So we're going for symmetry here. All right. And same with this one. All right, here's our front, and here's our gusset. Same thing with the gusset. Okay, so now what I would do when I'm doing this, like to be really, really precise, I will fold this and then pin it down the fold. And I spend a lot of time when I'm copying something, I really want it to be identical. I spend a lot of time on this step, especially if I couldn't cut it apart, right? Is if I couldn't cut this apart and I was trying to deal with the elastic and everything, I sometimes am pinning the garment that I'm copying to something on the board here, like if I have like the wool felt mat or something, or I will pin it, like I'll fold it in half, even though, like, pretend like this is all still assembled. I will pin it here on the side seams very perfectly. I sit there very, very precise because most likely you're going to find that this isn't symmetrical when you take it apart, and it's because they didn't cut it well, they didn't sew it well, whatever. There's a lot of reasons. It may have washed weirdly. You just never know, right? The elastic really is, getting rid of the elastic really helps to get this nice and symmetrical. All right, so now let's just pick one piece and I'll show you what I would do. So I strongly recommend folding your paper and making a full pattern piece. If you watched the stream where I was cutting out the underwear, you can see how much more to my benefit it was to have the full piece, because we all hate cutting knit on the fold, right? So if they're really small pieces, I would give yourself the gift of a whole pattern piece, all right? So now what I would do is line this on the fold here, right? And weight it down. And I'm telling you, I get really, really picky about it. You can tape it to the paper, just tape it, that's fine. Staple it. Stapling is a little bit, depends on the fabric. Some staples won't penetrate knit, so you can try that. So now, I often use this, especially if I am knocking something off that is still sewn, and I don't have the ability to take it apart, because I can go right through the fabric and it won't hurt it, right? In this case, you know, all bets are off, right? We can trace this, and I will be really careful about it. And the one thing to remember is we are working on the seam line and a little less because I cut off the elastic here. So this is the seam line on the side seam and the gusset. So anything we add after that is seam allowance. Here we need to build it back up and then add the seam allowance on the leg hole and on the waist, right? So we'll get that roughly there. And so now I really love the see-through ruler because I can add parallel lines, and I will add whatever seam allowance you want. Like this is going to have a 1/4 inch. You can add 3/8, half, whatever you want. And now down here at the leg hole, we know we need to add back the 1/4 inch that I cut off. That was with the elastic, right? And same with the waist. And always get a right angle here. When it's on the fold, you want a right angle. When it's a seam, you want a nice transition. All right, and then down here we can add seam allowance. And now we're going to add seam allowance to our leg holes. It's very easy to forget what you've done and what you haven't done. So being methodical is really important so that you don't forget. Because there's nothing like copying your favorite garment and then you find that it's not the same. It probably won't be, just to warn you. It'll be a little different because your fabric selection is different, your elastic is different. You know, it's just something like sometimes, especially pants, I see with a lot of pants, people really want to copy their pants. The pants break in and you wear them for a while and they will get asymmetrical or stretched out in areas, and that's why they fit so good. So you just gotta break them in. All right, so now here's our front, right? And it's, you know, folded like that. So now we're gonna cut this out. Now to be most accurate, if you were using like a thicker paper, I would staple it. I'm not too worried on this brown paper. and then I would cut it apart. Usually I use my pattern scissors. And if you used, I'm hoping you didn't use Sharpie. You know, I just do this so you can see it. But cut your lines off if you used Sharpie, because that adds to the thickness. Okay, so here we go. We have our front. Now let's say we made our back, right? I just want to give you a couple of little tips about seam transition. Okay, so here's my back. So let's say I traced my back off. I'm just going to trace something here, right? Right, well, okay, so we have our back, and then we've gone and added back all of our, you know, amounts that we trimmed off and our seam allowance, right? Something like that, and then this is a 1/4 inch, right, that, right? Okay, so now we need to make sure that this sews to this. So before you cut out the second piece, whether you started on the back and then your second piece is the front, or vice versa, before you cut it out, lay the one you have finished on top and make sure, like, do I have a nice seam transition here? So we're going to draw in a parallel line that's double the seam allowance. Sharpie's not great for that, right? And then I lay this on, lining it up along the seam there, just like that. And then I can go, okay, is this a good transition? You know, I don't want a little point right here, right? So I would definitely want to smooth it out and get a nice transition, because you're going to do that anyway when you sew it. So you might as well build back what you need or trim off what you don't need, so that you don't change some of these measurements. So that's really important. And it's the same with the gusset. So when you go to do your gusset, which I've now lost, you're going to do the same thing, right? You're going to line it up here as if it's sewn and make sure you have a nice smooth transition. I can't stress this enough. It'll make your sewing more accurate, and the garment, all the work you've put into it, it makes it worth it. All right. All right. So now lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to mark it. This is really important as well. Don't forget to do this. You don't tell yourself, I would never forget this. Okay, so we're going to draw our grain line on here, on that fold line. We're going to make sure that we don't have any weird points right here, right? So I can see I have a sliver, right? Same with here. And really what I'm doing is just making sure that I don't have a point. It's okay if I have a rounded shape or something, that's fine. We just didn't want it to be, you know, like this or like this, right? Okay, so now we're going to say front, whatever you want to call it, right? And now you're going to write in your seam allowance, 1/4 inch seams. And another really helpful thing that I've done in the past, I'll use a different color, I don't know if it'll show up on camera or not, is I sometimes will draw in, like if I didn't have all these lines here, I draw in my seam allowance like this as a juncture. So then I can see, oh, this is 1/4 inch and this is 1/4 inch. And like say I had no seam allowance at one end, it would just, you know, this side seam would go to here, 1/4 inch. And then there would just be no line if there was no seam allowance, but there is, right? We have 1/4 inch here. So that's also really helpful because it's very visual, because you might go 1/4 inch, but did I put it everywhere? And you did, right? Because you need these seams. All right, and so the last thing that we need to write on here is the cut amount. Cut 1. Right? Or, and put your fabric, you could put main fabric, whatever. I'm just telling you this as if you're copying other garments, right? So that's the thing. And if you're doing a gusset, cut 2. And you can write 1 inner, 1 outer as a reminder, hey, maybe I want to do a different fabric on the inside, like a solid, and I have a print on the outside, right? So that's really important. And the last little thing you might want is a notch at your center here for when you're putting on your elastic, when you're metering elastic, sometimes it's nice to have that as like a sewing point, because the side seams on this pair in particular aren't an actual halfway point between center front and center back, right? So if I wanted a halfway point, it'd be somewhere right here, right? So if you want to use your centers as a halfway point, I would write them on your pattern piece, because otherwise, when you get to the sewing machine, you're gonna be like, oh, I have to figure out the center on every single one of these pieces. So that's one of my tips, because I'm gonna have to do that in my sewing stream, because I only did the side seam, I didn't put a center notch on front or back. So, okay, I think that's everything. Hopefully I don't think of anything else. Once you figure out your elastic, I usually will write it on here. So like I know on that pair, I'll say legs, 23.5 inch, elastic, and then waist 27.5 or whatever it is, and take it with a grain of salt, because each time you get your elastic, it might be a little different, right? Or maybe you're feeling like, I could still wear these underwear, but maybe I would want the elastic to be looser because I'm a little larger right now, or a little smaller. You want a smaller elastic. So just use it as a guide, especially when you're buying materials. That will be helpful. All right, so that's my little how to copy your underwear. I'm sure I didn't cover all underwear styles, but just leave me a question and I'll answer you if I can. All right, good luck.